Even my kids are starting to show symptoms of this problem. You're not necessarily tired or relaxed from it. You're just kind of thinner in thought. So, that's concerning as well as this new generation, but also a lot of adults as well. They're incapable of being bored.
Makes sense.
Great morning, world. Great morning, humans. And once again, welcome to Make Sense with Dr. JC. And this is our live edition of our podcast. So what we're going to do today is we're going to make sense of a very, very hot topic right now. And it's an interesting one because we typically spot this topic of brain rot and doom scrolling and excessive obsessive use of social media. We typically spot that in others, but it's more difficult to spot it in ourselves. And the reason why is because it's hypnotic. Sometimes we don't even know we're doing it. And there's also a little bit of we don't want to admit that we're doing it. I think that it's natural for me to think that I'm different. Even my kids, that for the most part are doing better than I ever dreamed, are starting to show symptoms of this problem. And that's why I was inspired to do some work on this. The symptoms that I see with my children are things like attention lag, a little bit of a lag of how much time it takes for them to respond to you. But also an interesting behavior that I find my children and this new generation, I hate talking about the generation, I'm some sort of old guy. But I'm noticing that they're finding meaningless content, meaning like content that means nothing. It has no value or anything like that outside of entertainment and distraction. They're finding meaningless content and they're finding it funny. And I don't get it, right? So maybe that's an age thing, but I'm just seeing this trend where children are watching just like a cartoon of a cat doing nothing and just laughing hysterically and seeing how it's getting tons of hours of consuming or consumption. And it's just the greatest thing that they've ever seen. So, that concerns me because it means that they're not only distracting themselves, but they're also in this situation where they're distracting themselves with stuff that doesn't mean anything other than the distraction. So my concern, therefore, is that my children and this generation, which they're part of, may never actually get a chance to experience life. And as I say, unwrap the present moment. Because what they're doing with most of their time is they're spending it on distracting themselves from what's actually happening, right? And you see this, when you see the attention lag, you see somebody that is not paying attention to anything that's actually going on. They're so enveloped in something else, distractive. And you say something to them, and then the attention lag shows how entranced they are. So I guess I would say I'm a little bit concerned, but also fascinated, because I haven't made up my mind about anything yet, like I keep saying. So just to give you an example, we actually, for whatever reason, we don't need to repeat it, but we took my daughter's phone away for a few weeks just to kind of give her a break from it because we started noticing some of these things. And I was in the grocery store. And, this is my dream child. I was in the grocery store and I was in a creepy way spying just to check on her because she was in the car. And I noticed that without her phone, she was sitting there putting the window up and down. So, that's concerning as well, as where I see that this new generation, but also a lot of adults as well, it's not just the kids, is they're incapable of being bored and allowing their mind to wander and stuff like that. So today what we're going to do is we're going to look under the hood of what is known as brain rot. And once again, I haven't made up my mind about it yet. So I'm just going to be pointing it out. So I call this brain rot the erosion of human authorship. So that's the idea, is that my perception is that to a certain degree, we're losing authorship of our lives. And that's the whole essence of my book. And the interface response system is helping people reclaim control of their reality and their life as the dominant force of it, but also as the shot caller. So if we're losing authorship, that means that we're moving towards this situation where authorship is being determined for us. So that's why I am very interested in this. So it begins like this. Have you ever noticed that like hollowed out feeling after you've kind of committed to some time scrolling. I've noticed it. You're not necessarily tired or relaxed from it. You're just kind of thinner in thought. Like you've stepped away from thought and kind of less present than you were even just an hour ago or maybe 30 minutes ago. So time has passed, content was flowing, right? You got those dopamine hits, you got the stimulation of dopamine, yet nothing really came of it, right? Nothing stayed long enough to become part of you. That's what's interesting about scrolling. It's like you're not getting smarter, right? What you're doing is losing authorship for longer and entertaining and stuff like that. But you're not even sure what you saw. This is an interesting thing. Like if I say, hey, tell me about those last 40 things that you just looked at, and they'll be like, they have no idea. And that wasn't the goal. The goal was to keep themselves busy. And by the way, like I said, this is not just about kids. This is about adults too. And this is not a form of laziness, by the way, or weakness. That's an interesting thing that's my observation. It's more the physiological sensation of the dopamine loop running without resolution. So that's kind of what is cool about drugs, right? Recreational drugs is that you're not really concerned with like what's happening. It's more about the experience. And there's no concern about like, did I accomplish anything? And that's why people get hooked on drugs, by the way, is there's no end, right? So in 2026, what we're labeling as digital brain rot may not actually be about like bad content that they're looking at. It may actually more be about the erosion of that authorship. And that's a real shift of looking at this, we have to start looking at what we're consuming, but also how we are acting while we're consuming. So I came up with this idea of what's called supposed deterioration. Now, Oxford, I always look to Oxford for definitions, and it's not because I want to learn what the definition is I want to learn what society is telling us the definition is. So Oxford labels and defines brain rot as the supposed deterioration of our intellectual state from consuming trivial online content. Now, the key words there that I take note of is posed and trivial, right? So those words kind of make that idea sound like speculative, right? Supposed, like maybe. And I think that they need like to be reevaluated. And also this idea of looking at it as just trivial, right? However, the data on doom scrolling, which is another term, and by the way, when one kid says to the other that they're doom scrolling, there's a laugh at the end of that. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I guess, when I was in college or high school, if somebody got like so drunk and they passed out or fell down, we would laugh, right? So there's a new version of that now. And when kids are just doom scrolling, what's happening is that their friends are saying, they laugh at it, like, oh, she's just doom scrolling and stuff like that. But think about what that means, right? It means that you're scrolling and acknowledging, but with humor, that it's really pending doom. Because if you get a hold of a track of content and it's like negative stuff, which very often it is, and there's an algorithm to it, by the way. There's a sequence of how much negative stuff before the sale of something. There's a lot of strategy going on there, but that's what doom scrolling is. So we're watching a measurable shift in attention span recovery. I taught you about that attention lag and that recovery time. And this is like more about executive function, right? Load and stuff like that. Because what we're worried about is that we're losing cognitive abilities and cognitive load. And it's also about emotional regulation. One thing I can tell you for sure is if a kid is struggling with emotional stuff, and I've seen that and I've been like that, even still to this day, if I'm feeling depressed or anxious or anything like that, and I take a break and I do a little bit of a fast from social media, it has a dramatic effect on my mood, for sure. So, here I am talking about this in observation of my children, but I find myself doing it as well. So it's extremely powerful. So we're watching a measurable shift in that attention span recovery time, executive function load, as well as emotional regulation. So we're observing an increase in what many people are referring to as an attention lag. So you see it in kids first, but it's not just kids, it's adults too. You say their name once and you say it twice. And sometimes you have to poke your head in and see if they're even listening, because sometimes they have their AirPods in, right? They don't even listen to what's going on around. And we crack up when we see those videos on social media where somebody like trips and falls on their face because they were looking at their phone, or we hear about the car crashes and stuff like that. But this is real. We say their name once, twice, three times, and there's that delay, that attention lag, that split second when they must return from whatever the feedback loop is that they're in and return to what we call reality. But we're seeing kids spend so much time in this alternate reality that we're starting to become the opposite of reality. I just interviewed Rizwan Virk, the author of the simulation hypothesis. That's going to come out in 3 weeks or so. This is one of the leading world experts on whether or not we're living in a simulation. And I don't want to get into that right now, but there's proof that whether we're living in a simulation or not, we seem to be moving towards one where they're spending so much time in this alternate world that the reality world that maybe I see as reality is becoming the alternate. Isn't that interesting? So there's that delay. So kids often refer to that, idea of being like totally locked in and focused to their social media. They refer to it as being locked in. Sometimes I'll be in my car and somebody will be on the phone with me with hands-free and they'll say hi to my daughter or my son. And I'll go, oh, she can't hear you. She's locked in. She's wired in. So this is another thing too. Now I had a Walkman, right? I had earphones and stuff like that, but it's moving a little faster now. I think that's what I'm observing. So that lag isn't some sort of a moral failure, by the way. It's kind of neural conditioning. That's what's scary about it. I don't look at it and think worse of people when they do that. I'm curious and I say, I haven't made up my mind. And I start looking at what's really going on and I see that it's more of a neural conditioning. And just like we build habits, this is like wiring our brains. And you only notice it when you notice that attention lag. So here's the harder truth. Adults have it too, right? This is not just about our kids. And right now, you might be in this state where you're saying, yes, I see this happening, but it's happening with us as well. And I'm not afraid to admit it. So it's that moment in between drifting and shifting and choice. So what I mean by drifting is when we're kind of like drifting off into something. Sometimes we'll drift off into imagination. I remember as a kid, my parents would ask me, hey, but I would be imagining things with my own brain. And sometimes there's a lot of great outcome of that. But now it's not their brain. It's technology is becoming the brain. So the real problem isn't the scroll. It's more about the drift. So we don't consciously decide to doom scroll. This is interesting. The activity of using the phone is something that we consciously pick it up and sometimes unconsciously, right? We know about phantom phones and all that stuff. Right now, I'm speaking to you and I don't have my phone in my pocket, but I might check to see if I do. I'm using my phone for the Substack audience right now. So we don't consciously decide to do something that's not good for us, but we drift into passive, unconscious consumption. We drift into it. So it's about the drift. And it's been strategically designed to trigger this. That's an important distinction for us to make, and potentially how we can break the loop or at least take a break from it is not just think of this as like some sort of a toy that we play with too much, but the manufacturers and the brains behind the toy are using the toy strategically to get the doom scrolling, to get the unconscious behavior. So that's an important thing to recognize, because it might make you say, should I check this? So when scrolling, we're not learning when we scroll. That's an interesting insight as well. When I'm scrolling, I'm not looking to learn. I'm just entertaining myself. Now, sometimes I'll find myself looking for content or looking for inspiration, and that's cool. I'm not all against social media. I'm just against this behavior. It's more about distracting and entertaining ourselves. And if you don't recognize that, you might buy into this belief system that you're like being proactive in your life. And that's one of the reasons people struggle so much with following through is they think that they're moving towards their dreams when they're just sucking up time. So tension loosens and intention begins to fade in this world. And the feed begins to take over and you don't even know it. Remember, you don't know you're drifting in the water until the moment that you look up shore and see your towel and your shoes like 100 yards away. And you say, holy crap, I've drifted. And that's when you can shift. But that attention lag and the amount of time it takes for someone to recognize they're drifting, sometimes they don't even recognize it because it goes on for hours. That's increasing. So there's a moment, small, almost invisible, between the drift and the choice, right? There's that moment where you realize you're drifting, and that's the moment that equates to everything. That's an important moment to first acknowledge exists, but then look for it. So it's the split second where you notice, wait a second, I didn't mean to be here. I didn't mean for this to happen. How did this happen? You know, it happens when we drive sometimes. 10 seconds will go by and you'll realize, did I even look at the road for those past 10 seconds? So that's an important moment because it'll get you focused maybe on the road. But sometimes we're doing things without knowing it, right? So that's the doorway back to reclaiming authorship of your life. So that's important in this discussion. There is a way. The human brain, if you look at it, 95% of it are perceptions of things and our decisions, which is why I created the interface response system. A lot of it is happening without asking us. And there's an illusion that we're making decisions and things. But we have to first acknowledge that for the most part, our brain operates without asking our permission, right? So that's an important distinction. And that's phase one of the interface response system, which we call perceive. This is the stuff you'll get in my book. But if you look at the brain's goal, what the brain does, the heart beats and the brain thinks. And we have two hemispheres and all this cool stuff. And there's you have your stress response system, which comes in handy if you're being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger. It's been a while since we've done that. But the brain is really a meaning-making machine, right? It's a sense-making, meaning-making machine. And the challenge is that our five senses, although miraculous, are limited. And what I mean by that is if you study how much of reality that we actually see, we don't see everything that's going on. So the brain naturally is looking to fill in the gaps and make everything else up. So that's what's dangerous about perception. And that's why two people can look at something and see something different, is because for the most part, we're making up most of what it is that we see. Now, how do we make it up? We have our hypothalamus or hippocampus possesses our, here's the neuroscience stuff. Once again, I'm not a doctor of neuroscience. Nobody is. But hippocampus is where our memories are stored. So that's dangerous because if you have trauma or you've had some mother, father, teacher, preacher stuff taught to you, you're going to always reference it. But we're always trying to figure things out. That's what I mean by meaning-making machines. So that's a tough thing to do. And it's exhausting to think, by the way. You burn a lot of calories when you think. This is why a lot of people don't read. It's exhausting. It's fatiguing. So it makes sense that the brain wants to stay busy. And that's why these fuckers that make all these technologies are taking advantage of it. Is for the most part, if you want to put up a post that goes viral, it doesn't have to be important or have strong context. It just has to be something that gives people a distraction. If you look, the most viral things going on in social media are not things that carry strong context. They're distractive in nature, and that's what people are looking for. But in that split moment where we realize, how did I get here? This is not my home. This is not my house. How did I just burn an hour doing this, playing Grand Theft Auto or something? That's an important moment. So in that moment, if you recognize that moment, right now you could also say, have I been paying attention to the dragon for these 30 minutes, or have I just been scrolling while he's talking or something like that, right? So if you can recognize that in that moment, you can ask a question. What am I looking for right now? What am I avoiding? And what state am I in right now? Make an assessment of the present moment. You can ask those questions. Most people won't find their way to do that, but that's the opportunity right there. So that's called digital mindfulness. That's an actual term. It means to be mindful while you're using your digital interfaces, digital mindfulness. And it doesn't require deleting apps or demonizing AI, by the way, right? It's just about moving from passive consumption to active authorship. So it's all about controlling our consumption and also recognizing that we're even consuming. The brain is programmable, my friends. We know that the brain, where neurons fire together, wire together, right? That's the Hebbian. So it's all about consumption. So what we're consuming with regularity, we find ends up being what we assume with regularity. But if you're unaware of what you're consuming, and it's not just social media and AI, it's also the people that you hang out with, the daily activities, watching the news on TV. So we have these ideas of things that we think that we need to know. But I'm just saying, why don't we step back from it and say, well, what am I consuming? Because it ends up being what I'm assuming. So AI and social media is not the villain here, right? Unconsciousness is the villain. Unawareness is the villain. So AI and social media amplifies either presence or absence. So that means that it could be a good thing or a bad thing. It's either going to amplify your presence or your absence. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So if you use AI as a creator, if you let AI be the creator, you will slowly disappear from your own creative process. Think about what that means. So that would be the equivalent of just saying, just in a sentence, build me this, write me this book, do this. And you let AI do all the creation. And, AI doesn't have a brain. It's got a different type of a brain, but it's not saying, hey, thanks so much for helping me out there and letting me use my brain. But you're taking yourself away from the creative process, and that has a long-term negative effect. However, if you use AI as an assistant or maybe as a collaborator, remember presence versus absence, your cognition can actually increase. So it's not all bad. We see a decrease. There's a study out of MIT. I'll try to find it for the podcast episode that shows that in general, we're decreasing our cognitive function and cognitive load. And that's because of how people are working with social media and AI. Okay. So there's a correlation that AI is not good for us in that sense. But if you're somebody that is taking advantage of the most valuable aspect of working with AI, and that is the creative process of what's called the prompt, right? It becomes critical. So the prompt is not some sort of a technical step to trigger the AI. It's your creative process and your own thinking. So that's the difference between letting AI be the creator and versus being your assistant or collaboration, just like working with somebody else. The same thing would happen if you had a partnership with somebody, and I'm sure some of you have done this, where they're doing all the work, they're doing all the creative process, and your role is to just kind of sit there. Their cognitive load and cognitive function is going to improve and yours is going to decrease. So it's not that much different. So AI is not the villain. So small, lazy prompts that kind of put all the creative process into AI, right? They train cognitive dependency, not cognitive dependency. You start to progressively require AI to do the job. And you'll notice that if you're using it a lot in that sense, you'll start to slowly disappear from the equation. And maybe even the forecast might even be that we can't carry a conversation without using AI. Love and appreciate you all. I'll be back next week. For those of you that I'm going to see in Chicago for the actual live book launch at the Creative Con event, at the International Ballroom Friday night on the 20th is the actual launch of my book, and that is Make Sense, How to Rewire Your Mind and Transform Your Life. It's available on Amazon. I hope you go out and get it and give me some input, good or bad. But just don't reach out to me after reading my book called Make Sense and tell me that it doesn't make sense or you don't get it, because then I'll just fall on the ground and be paralyzed. So love and appreciate you all. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you next time.